There will be signs of hockey, and we can't wait to stop at each and every one of them.
Hey everybody, welcome to our very first interview. We're really happy to have Ron MacLean on as our first guest. Really, he needs no introduction. Ron's been on Hockey Night in Canada, Hometown Hockey, Rogers. You've seen him on many broadcasts, no doubt. So we really appreciate Ron for being gracious with his time, and we hope you enjoy our interview. Yeah, Ron, thank you very much for joining us. We really appreciate it. I guess first and foremost, how are you doing with this whole shutdown?
Well, as you know, Brandon, I've been doing In Conversation, a series, much like you're doing here with Zoom for all the kids, the great hockey players in Atlantic Canada, and especially the Maritimes, where your dads and your schools are so valuable, both for officials and for players. So I do the In Conversation 3 times a week, and that's kind of fun because it's not just hockey players. I've had to interview artists, musicians. As an example, tomorrow I'm doing Wesley Schultz as lead singer with the Luminaires. And how am I getting him? But he's a friend of Tyson Barrie, a defenseman for the Toronto Maple Leafs. So there's all these weird degrees of separation or unification, and that's been enjoyable. And yeah, Carrie and I look forward to the break. I was reading books outside of my hockey books, which are all in behind me, but it hasn't felt too difficult. It was really, you and I were just saying, you see Orel's cap behind you. He was a police officer in Moncton, as we know, who we lost in 1974 in a very similar tragedy. He and his partner died, and that's your father Charlie's dad. And it's a very big part of my history covering the National Hockey League. As we've discussed, Charlie, he kept that pretty much to himself. It was a pain or a core wound that he was able to overcome and have a great both university and NHL career. And it's a really special connection that I cherish because my father, you see behind me here, I have a Mountie. This is a statue of a Mountie that I gave my father upon his retirement from the RCMP. Dad was military, but when he retired from the Air Force after 32 years, he went to K Division Rural Detachment of the RCMP in Red Deer for 15 years. He was a dispatcher. So he would deal with all the officers out in their cars on the roads. And I remember an officer telling me about a situation where Dad was at the helm. There was one Mountie responded to a horrible car crash in Alberta. 6 had died, 3 were critically injured, and it was just chaos. And it was one Mountie on a rural road in Alberta. And my dad had to call the air ambulance, call backup, and all the things that would have been happening, of course, in Nova Scotia during this complete heartbreaking rampage. And, for Constable Heidi Stevenson's family, for all of your family, because of the connection to Orel, all Canadians are feeling through the whole tragedy, heartbroken. But in particular, we feel for those first responders who go to that scene, and they such passion, such pride in what they do, and they never think to worry about themselves. It's just such selfless service that you admire. And yeah, it really touched me because that's the statue I gave. Dad's gone now, but when he retired in 1986, I presented him with that Mountie that I proudly have here. So it's a really nice tie that you and your dad and Orel share.
And yeah, certainly we send all of our thoughts and prayers to just everybody that was impacted by that situation, Nova Scotia. Just something that's terrible, and it's you hopefully that the folks there will get support by the community, which I know they will. And Ron, I guess kind of getting into the interview here, congratulations, you just turned 60, the big milestone, 60. My dad turned that earlier in the year, so I guess first and foremost, congratulations. It's a nice threshold to reach. And just talking about, you've kind of launched this new series where you're sitting at home and interviewing Canadians, not just hockey players, but icons, folks that can tell some great stories. And I'm just kind of curious, how did this all come about to kind of adapt to the changing situation? Like, how did this come about where, you're away from the broadcast booth, you're away from the studio? Like, how did these things get done?
Well, we were going to do best of series. For sure, Rogers Hometown Hockey, it was easy. We pieced together some of the interviews, some of the stories that were accomplished over the tour. Tara Sloan and I went in and did 3 shows to replace North Vancouver, Campbell River, and Edmonton. And then we were going to carry that on. But of course, we're all under house arrest. We had to isolate, and it just wasn't safe to put people in the CBC Broadcast Center, or One Mount Pleasant is where Rogers is headquartered. Neither really has many people coming and going unless they're essential service. So yeah, this is the alternative, is to do the Zoom calls or various technologies like wirecasting, or there's Sean Green, a former Major League Baseball player, has one called Greenfly. There's ways you can gather people, but it's funny because you and I can kind of see with our peripheral vision one another, but I just get such a kick out of, we had Mark McMorris, great snowboarder, 20-time medalist at the Winter X Games. He was doing one from Hawaii with Emily Clark, who's a hockey player. They're both Saskatchewan kids, one from Regina, one from Saskatoon. And it was magic. It was like I'd introduced two people at a cocktail party, and away they went. And who knew that it would work? And it's going to take a while for people to know that it's there at sportsnet.ca, but much like what you're doing, once they get onto it, Noah Dobson's a great, kids all look up to Noah. So you've created something that I think for young hockey kids, this is so tough on them, right? I just can't even imagine pulling away my end of my hockey playoffs and then no baseball or golf to go to. Crazy. Golf may come back. Looks like that's the one that may return quickest. But it's a challenging time and kind of a neat time.
And I kind of touched on the fact that you're really a preeminent storyteller in Canada. I mean, you look at the game of hockey, it seems there's always been that ingenuity, that innovation, that streak to really find a way to make it happen. Whether that's, the first hockey puck was made out of an organic material that I think folks at home know what I'm talking about, to I was reading a story about, a northern community where they travel 400 kilometers over snowmobile to get to their hockey games. There's always been that spirit of ingenuity. I'm kind of curious where you look at this shutdown and you see that, things are innovating, where you've adapted to an online. It seems like a lot of folks are going online. Like, do you see some changes that are going to happen due to this kind of forced shutdown, I guess, for hockey?
Well, for sure. There's a lot of things within the business world. I think you'll see many shift to working from home. Those who like it, I suppose if you have young children underfoot, you want to go back to the office, right? But I do feel there'll be, through the technology and mother invention idea that we're going through, a lot of people finding ways to work from their homes or differently. With regard to sport, the whole question, like there was a concert on the weekend. I don't know if you caught much of the One World at Home concert Global Citizens put on. That was really haunting to see all these great artists perform without the dance party or without the big crowd at Farm Aid or Live Aid. And hopefully that's not gone away, because it is. I mean, in one hand, it's a nuisance. I remember being at U2 at Magnetic Hill, seeing U2 and Arcade Fire play there, and the whole of the Maritimes converged. Took for 5 hours to drive from Charlottetown to Moncton, which is normally 90 minutes. And it was a great experience. Awful day, rained like heck, and you lose your shoes in the muck 42 times. But just the oneness of us all sharing that show was great, and it'll happen again, I think, but it won't happen right away. It's going to be very hard to imagine Rogers hometown hockey next year. So how in the world are we going to do that? We'll have to sort of listen to the experts and pray that one day we can all be together, as the saying goes.
Yeah, and obviously somebody that's pretty, close to the heartbeat of kind of what's going on in terms of the hockey world. I mean, there's a lot of folks at home that might be wondering when they're going to see NHL hockey on next. I mean, do you have a sense? I know it's really, really tough with the situation, but do you maybe have a sense of what's going to happen for the rest of the season?
Well, I wish, Brandon, I was doing this. I'm interviewing Gary Bettman tomorrow, so I wish I had the chat with Gary under my belt and I could give you a little more insight. But I had been hearing, a lot of optimism. The program, as I understood it, was that teams are being told middle of May we'll have camp. They get 2 weeks to get ready, and then something will happen June 1st, whether it's the end of the regular season or some kind of a wonky readjusted playoffs. No one knows that answer. And maybe Gary will be able to shed a little light, but I doubt it, right? And then the other thing is, where do they hold these games? And without crowds, how do they hold these games? Which is how I believe they'll do it. It's just too risky to bring people together. Even within the team itself, you have so many around the club, and some players have, children at home who are of compromised health situation. So they'll be scared to go wherever there's a possibility to contract COVID-19, not so much for themselves, but for maybe the child or someone in the house that is compromised with lung issues or respiratory issues. And then you have coaches and equipment managers and on and on and on, doctors around the teams that you normally have, some of whom are in the high risk category, such as myself, being 60 and up, or have issues that, makes their immune system susceptible. So those are questions for the NHL. They've got all these layers. They have to deal with immigration. Can you get athletes back into the country? First and foremost, you'll listen to the Center for Disease Control. You'll listen to the World Health Organization and all the tentacles of those areas of expertise. Then you have to deal with the teams and what kind of games we want to play. And yeah, it's a very challenging situation, and yet it will be very easy to pull together. Much like that rock concert on the weekend, when everybody's of like-minded intent, it's amazing how quickly you can make it all happen.
And for the casual fan at home, I mean, you've been around NHL rinks for many years. Like, the fact that there's going to be no fans at these games, do you think that's going to impact the energy on the ice at all and really impact the level of play, or what do you think that might happen there?
I don't think it will, because I think, ultimately you get so tunnel vision. I think it was your dad that said, 4 corners, 3 zones, 2 nets and a puck, right? And you just focus on those things, and outside the glass is kind of irrelevant. But I do think it's, like sport, what has always been great about sport is all the good intentions in the arena. It's like a glorified school or hospital or church. You have 20,000 to 100,000 people with intentions, good intentions for those that they're watching to do well. That scene around Kawhi Leonard's ball in the air, right? That happens. I felt the energy. It was really weird to be at the same seat that I watched the St. Louis Blues win the Stanley Cup. I was there for the All-Star game back in February, and the All-Star game, or January, means nothing. So there was no intensity. It was like I was at a cocktail party. Whereas previous to that, Game 6, when the Blues lost, I mean, the intensity, atmosphere that a crowd creates was unbelievable, and the streets and all the people going home sad. And then, of course, it flipped when they got to Boston and put on a clinic to protect the lead once they got it. Yeah, crowd will be different, but players won't care. They'll just go for reading the ice and the situation and do their thing.
And I touched on the fact that you're really a preeminent storyteller in Canada, and like obviously you've traveled from area to area, city to city, province to province. And I always enjoyed when you were, whenever you speak on TV, especially hometown hockey, where you can summarize, an ethos of a city or a story of a town, whether that revolves around a hockey player or a famous team, you name it. But I'm sort of curious, when you look at Atlantic Canada and maybe the ethos or the story that surrounds it, like in terms of hockey, I mean, can you draw anything out in terms of maybe a common theme for hockey players that come from the Maritimes?
It's hard, because in a way I say, okay, Forbes Kennedy was one of the first greats to come out of Prince Edward Island and born in Dorchester. He is all heart and soul. Skated like the wind, though, and he wasn't the only one to come with wheels. A few of the other guys, like Errol Thompson, could fly. But then you had this wave that kind of started with Al MacInnis winning the Conn Smythe and being so great in the '89 playoffs. That was a wave of belief that happened. And then Brad Richards replicated that, by winning the Conn Smythe Trophy. And then Nathan saw that, and there's that quality of. I think when I think of all those players, great respect. I don't think that's atypical of Canadians. I think you could lump a Saskatchewan kid in with a kid from New Brunswick and feel some of those same qualities are there. What they do have to do, especially the Maritimers, is they have to move away. And that's, when I had Mark McMorris and Emily Clark in conversation, Emily left her home to go to the Okanagan Hockey Academy. So she left Saskatoon. It's not like she left a small town, but she left Saskatoon to go out to Kelowna. And then she went to Wisconsin, Madison, to attend university. She made that, leap, like Brad Richards had to do, going to Notre Dame, Ethel Murray School in Wilcox, Saskatchewan, and like obviously Sydney did, going over to Shattuck St. Mary's. That is one story I link. The kids who have to leave the comfort of the beautiful support you have in the Maritimes to make it. That is an interesting dynamic that's sort of pretty uniform with the experience of all who ever made it. Doug MacLean has good stories about that. So that would be, if I was to say, for an Atlantic Canadian, and for the parents of that kid, boy, it's, Jillian Saulnier would know, to send your girl away, at 15, poof. But it's good. It makes them worldly. It makes them so capable of handling the fame and the fortune that's about to come their way. I think it's a really constructive step on your path to either the Olympics or the National Hockey League.
And, obviously we have a lot of maritime hockey players that are sitting at home wishing they could be on the ice right now. We've actually got a couple questions from them, if that's all right with you.
Yeah, great.
So the first question comes from Camden in Parsbro, Nova Scotia, and he plays for the Adam Penguins. And his favorite player is Mitch Marner. And his question for you, Ron, is there a favorite thing about Mitch Marner's game that you most enjoy to watch?
I absolutely. We had him on our show too. So if you have the opportunity, watch the In Conversation with Mitch Marner. He's there with Natalie Spooner, and Natalie Spooner I thought was the most energetic human alive. She's done an amazing race, she's done Battle of the Blades, but Mitch has got her. He's Edward Scissorhands. He's so dynamic, so full of life. His on-ice imagination is second to none. One thread there is he had an older brother and only one. Chris is his name, and I think Chris gave him a little bit of the competitive spit. Connor McDavid has a brother and only one, and that's Cameron, who's 3.5 years older, and they actually played hockey together. That's how quickly Connor was playing as a 6-year-old with the Nines. But that gave him spit, gave him a competitive gene or character. And that thread happens. Mark McMorris, the snowboarder, has only one brother, a little older, 2 years, 3 years older, Craig. And so I've observed that in Marner. That's his story. His brother was good, but he was great. And they worked really hard with, you would with Charlie. He worked with Rob DeVoe, was the name of his guru from the time he was 4 years old, only because the brother was there. And he came along and he was the size of a coffee cup. And they can't put him out on the ice. But it was like apparent right at 4 years of age that there was something special going on with Mitch. And yeah, his edge work is for me the best thing. His skating is just something to behold. Him in pregame warm up. He wishes he figure skated, but he did all that through his specific academy work with Rob. And I even the Hill Academy, and a coach that I know named Lindsay Hofford, who I refereed a ton of Lindsay's games when he was in the Tier 2 loop in Central Ontario. So though, listen to those guys and be as often as you can working on multi-skills, but working on your balance. That's a really big thing that Marner has.
And our second question, I'm going to make sure I get the technology to work here, but we have a question from beautiful Cape Breton, Nova Scotia, Ron.
Good.
So let's check.
Hi, Ron. My name is Austin. Here's my question for you. Who's your favorite retired hockey player and how would he do in today's game? Thank you.
That's a great question, Austin. I would say Lanny McDonald. I grew up kind of idolizing the story of a goalie named Jacques Plante, who's gone now, but Lanny McDonald was with the Calgary Flames, captain of the '89 Stanley Cup team, and he's retired now, does a lot of work with the Hockey Hall of Fame. We actually have him coming up on, it would be either May 1st, whatever the Saturday is, I think May 1st. He's going to be on with Wayne Gretzky and myself doing a series on Sportsnet that would be 8 o'clock Atlantic. And he relives the '89 Stanley Cup. And he tells a story. He scored a big goal in that game. He hadn't been dressed in games 3, 4, and 5 of the series, but he dressed for game 6, scored a huge goal. But his dad said, it wasn't the goal, Lanny. It was the hit that you threw on Larry Robinson that was the tipping point of us winning the Stanley Cup. And I get chills just thinking about Lanny, talking about his dad. And yeah, Lanny McDonald. He's a former Leaf and former Flame. That would be my guy.
And I guess, again, we really appreciate your time, Ron, and being really gracious and sharing, I guess, a lot of insight and advice for maritime hockey players. And I guess on the last thing, I mean, like we touched on, there's lots of families at home, mom and dads and young kids looking on ways to improve their hockey skill and stay involved with the hockey community. I guess, do you have any advice for them during this whole shutdown?
Well, there's if you're seriously close to junior or moving on, there's some technologies you should know about. Mars blades that you can put on your actual hockey skates that turn them into inline skates, things like that. If you're younger, mini sticks is huge. Connor McDavid and Sam Bennett of the Calgary Flames played mini sticks every day, and there was also Travis Dermott in those games, plays for the Toronto Maple Leafs. Endlessly played mini sticks. They would go into separate bedrooms, dress into their uniforms, come out of the bedrooms, play the national anthem, and then play mini sticks. And that's why McDavid can dangle, as we say. And same with Austin Matthews. He played mini sticks. That's all he did. From the time he got up to the time he went to bed, in the aisleway on airplanes, he was playing mini sticks. So you can do that. Mike Hoffman, a great Florida Panther, his father used to have him stick handle a golf ball. And he would do it in the bedroom, and his father's rule was, if I hear the golf ball hit the baseboard, then you got to go to bed. But as long as you're able to stick handle the golf ball and not make it sound off the baseboard, you can stay up. Mitch Marner used to stick handle tennis ball religiously. Who else? There's another guy that I think it was Connor McDavid had to do a tennis ball. No, it was Jake DeBrusk. Jake DeBrusk of the Boston Bruins. His father Louis played in the NHL, but they have a chocolate lab who loves to get the tennis ball, and he could stay up as long as he could keep the tennis ball away from the lab. So work on that. You just keep your eye hand, do all those things. And I really believe, skating's everything in the game. We know that, but I do believe if you can shoot the puck and if you can handle the puck, buys you time. The whole game is time and space. So whatever gives you time, and usually a hard pass, a good shot, buys you time in the chaos of a hockey game.
And Ron, once again, we thank you for all the time, and we wish you all the best. And hopefully we see you on the television sometime soon for some NHL hockey.
Yeah, it was great to talk to you always, Brandon. Hugs to Charlie and the family, and we'll see you down east soon, or you up here in Oakville.
Thank you.